Donald Trump submits a motion to dismiss his Georgia case, this one brought by Big Fani Willis, the RICO charges that really led to nothing so far. We had Sidney Powell take a guilty plea, but led to no conviction since it's a diversion agreement. Same thing with Sidney Powell, Jena Ellis, and others who were there, Kenneth Chesebro. But now Trump is saying, my case should be entirely dismissed due to presidential immunity and due to the Supremacy Clause. And we're back down at a state court level. And so we know that these issues are already on appeal in the DC circuit. So the immunity issue and double jeopardy issue, by the way, are also on appeal in the DC circuit going to the Court of Appeals. And so there's some overlapping issues between presidential immunity at the state level and presidential immunity at the federal level. But Supremacy Clause is a new argument that we're going to take a look at. So all this is happening. Nancy Pelosi says, really, the federal Constitution doesn't matter all that much. And we can really just go state by state, not that big of a deal. And then we'll check in with Crazy Eyes Griswold and Muriel, the woman who denied the National Guard on January 6th when Trump said, hey, maybe we secure the premises a little bit more thoroughly. But she said no, go figure. Now we're going to go into this one, the motion to dismiss by Donald Trump, filed in the state of Georgia, Fulton County, Big Fani Willis's jurisdiction. The judge's name is Judge Scott McAfee. We've seen a lot of him here. Trump's team writes, the motion to dismiss the indictment based on presidential and Supremacy Clause immunity and a supporting memorandum of law. Now, they tell us in the introduction, Judge McAfee, Georgia, the people of America, from 1789 to 2023, no president ever faced criminal prosecution for acts committed while in office. Well, they didn't have a Trump for all those years and a psychopathic Democratic Party. That unbroken historic tradition of presidential immunity is rooted in the separation of powers and the text of the Constitution. That's why it didn't happen. Now, in the case called Nixon versus Fitzgerald, the Supreme Court of the United States held that a former president, quote, has absolute presidential immunity from civil damages for acts within the outer perimeter of his official responsibility. Already decided. 1982, the case is called Nixon. And in this lawsuit, in this filing, they call it Fitzgerald. Now, the same immunity that applied in civil cases also shields President Trump from criminal prosecutions, also for acts within the outer perimeter of his official duties. Now, the indictment in this case charges President Trump for acts that lie at the heart of his official responsibilities as president. And so the indictment is barred by presidential immunity, and it should be dismissed with prejudice and never come back again. They argue the president's absolute immunity shields him from criminal prosecution as well as a civil suit, saying indeed, immunity from prosecution is most central to the concept of immunity. Presidential immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts has deep roots in the separation of powers and the principles of federalism, just like Fitzgerald, the Nixon case held. The text of the Constitution and early authorities, they also confirm that the exclusive method to proceed against a president for crimes committed while in office is impeachment. And so backing up just a minute, when we see this sentence freaks a lot of people out. They say, wait a minute, what? Huh? The president is shielded from criminal prosecution? He has absolute immunity? Huh? And there are limiting principles on that, obviously. Okay, it's for stuff that happens within the outer perimeter of his official duties while he's in office. And if you think that something within those confines was criminal, impeach him and do it quickly. And we'll know that it's not a political hatchet job led by Nancy Pelosi and a fake illegally constituted J6 committee when the Senate, the cooling saucer of America, says overwhelmingly, yeah, this is not political. This dude's a criminal. And they vote to actually convict. That didn't happen here, but that's how it's supposed to work. And that would happen, okay, if somebody did something horrendous that was actually a crime, unlike what we have in this case with Trump. Early authorities like Chief Justice John Marshall and Justice Story, they recognize that the president's official acts are not subject to examination by some Secretary of State, by some federal court. They don't get to decide, man, that's an insurrection because I don't like Trump. It's a separation of powers. You don't get to do that. Historical practice over 234 years that they threw down the gutter confirms that the power to indict a current or former president for official acts does not exist. Otherwise, somebody would have done it. Now, the Supreme Court's analogous immunity doctrines, including presidential immunity from civil suit, we've got legislative immunity, we've got absolute judicial immunity. They confirm the president is also immune for criminal prosecution for official acts. Such immunity is particularly appropriate for the president because the presidency involves especially sensitive duties, requires bold and unhesitating action, and can be crippled by the threat of other politically motivated prosecutions by prosecutors who are partisan hacks. The acts alleged in this indictment against Donald Trump, it's pretty obvious. Those acts that you say are criminal, Fani, they lie within the outer perimeter of the president's official duties. And for this diagram, we always like to go to the angeron, the areola. And if Trump's duties, if he does it within the confines here, right at the tip, that's okay. But if Trump's actions are outside the outer perimeter, then they're not protected by presidential immunity. If he has all these acts out here, not protected. But But if Trump acts inside the outer perimeter of his presidential duties, that is still okay. Okay, he is within the areola and he is within the outer perimeter and he's good. Now, if he steps out of that, then the presidential immunity, you would argue, doesn't apply. You would impeach him immediately and that would be the end of it. Now, in fact, they lie at the very heart of the presidential responsibility, making statements to the public on matters of national concern, which is what Trump was doing, especially matters that involve federal interest, like the administration of election. That's his job. Talking to the DOJ is the quintessential exercise of his authority under the Take Care Clause. And communicating with state officials, the same thing. He's just urging them, exercise your official responsibilities. Don't screw it up. Urging Vice President Pence and Congress to do their official responsibilities, like to do their jobs that's consistent with the public good, that's totally appropriate. And he can also organize slates of electors to exercise their responsibilities. All of that is within his duties. So presidential immunity applies regardless of subjective intent as well. They say the allegation of malicious and corrupt motives, which is not even present here, does not affect immunity. So Jack Smith says, well, Trump did it with a bad motive. Trump did it because he is corrupt. They say, well, that's not the standard here. That's not how immunity works. Just because you say that, the motive is immaterial. You can't just claim that because everybody would just claim that. Immunity protects a public official from allegations that he or she also made false statements in the course of official duties. And they do that to protect them against constant onslaught, a barrage of assaults, of complaints and things. So the conduct charge in the indictment, and they're citing a Supreme Court case law for that, it falls under presidential immunity. And so therefore, this entire indictment, Fani, must be dismissed. Trump does not admit the truth to any of this garbage. Rather, we're just reiterating this so that you recall what's happening here, Judge McAfee. Saying the indictment charges that Trump took a series of actions, 5 categories. We'll detail those now. Public statements that he made. His free speech was illegal. He talked to the DOJ, which was his agency. That was also illegal. He talked to people investigating election fraud. That's a crime, according to deranged Jack Smith. He talked to state officials. Oh no. He talked to Mike Pence. Oh no. And somehow he participated organizing contingent slates of electors. Wow. Now all of that was to convince Mike Pence to exercise his authority in Trump's favor. Giant conspiracy. All right. So all that sounds like, presidential obligations. But they say first, the indictment says that Trump, while he was the president, he made a long series of public statements, blah, blah, blah. Right here, tweets posted on Twitter. They called that his speech was, quote, an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Here, this is what Fani's saying. He posted a tweet about Georgia election fraud. He talked about the Georgia legislature. He posted another tweet in this one. You can see here, he also talked about certifications and blah, blah. Okay, subsection B, we know this one. Now talking to the DOJ. Yes, okay. He talked to acting attorney general, Fani. How criminal is that? Communications with state officials. He apparently called someone in Georgia. He called people in Pennsylvania. He called people all over the place. The president pro tem of Georgia. Bunch of conversations. Arizona. Okay. Trump placed a phone call to the Speaker of the House in Arizona. Great. Now the indictment also says he talked to Mike Pence and he also talked with other electors. Trump urged Mike Pence to reject the slates of presidential electors or return them to the state legislatures, which all was within Mike Pence's ceremony. It wasn't ceremonial at the time. It's now been made ceremonial, but Mike Pence had a role to play and he was there as kind of the gatekeeper. And our analysis back at the time was not that Mike Pence could just pick which ones worked, but that he could reject them and he could turn it back over to the House or turn it back over to the state legislatures, right? Depending on the mechanics of how it all went down. We went analyze this a lot prior to the 2020 election. And I was never of the position that Mike Pence could say, these are ours, but certainly that he could reject them and say, these, I've got 2 things here. I've got questions about this, return it back and the House could debate it. We know that Ted Cruz was coming out here right in the middle of objecting and proposing an alternative solution here. So all of that, right, they fixed after the fact. For them, they said Mike Pence can't do any of that. But back at the time, of course, he could, which is why they changed it after the fact. So we know that, okay, the 5 categories. Fani charges all of them. Trump's going to prison based on all of that. But they say, no, not so fast, Big Fani Willis, who is the biggest DA in Fulton County, Georgia, which is a huge county in Georgia. I think the biggest county in Georgia, which is why we call her Big Fani, because she's the biggest prosecutor there. So President Trump's prosecution, they say to Judge McAfee, also telling this to Fani, is barred. Why? Presidential immunity. And we're going to see that we have a lot of case law here. Lots of case law from Fitzgerald. This one's from the Supreme Court, 1949. Let's apply it to this case here. They say these concerns that we just detailed for you have special force in this case, where a local prosecutor called Fani, answerable only to a small subset subset of the United States electorate, which is Fulton County. She has filed charges seeking to second-guess the official actions of the President of the United States. So one local prosecutor can just say, I'm going to go take this person out. Allowing these state and local officials to hamstring federal executive power threatens the principles of federalism and the vertical separation of powers between the federal government and the states. They say there is no healthy balance of power between the states and the federal government when you can just have any locally elected Fani in the country. We've got another one called Tishy, including those elected in enclaves of profound hostility to the chief executive like New York or Fulton County. They have the authority to haul the president into court on criminal charges for his official acts. It's insanity. They write, no, on the contrary, the Constitution guarantees the entire independence of the general government from the control of any of the respective states. It's a division of federal and state power that provides double security to the rights of the people. And they say this is no mere empty threat. If there's a difference here, the current Fulton County, Georgia indictment of President Trump, what this does is threatens to open the floodgates of politically motivated criminal prosecutions of virtually every future president. We'll see. Yeah, I might want to become a prosecutor again. Not again, but in the future. There are more than 2,300 local prosecutors and district attorneys in this country. The prosecutors represent and are only answerable to local interests. And that allowance would overlook the national communal character of the presidency. They don't care. The presidency implicates a national interest and continues and constitutes a single head that everybody looks to. If a sitting president in some intensely unpopular district can just be targeted, then that is going to be an alluring and effective electoral strategy. But it would undermine our entire government, and we cannot allow that to happen here. Every future presidential administration will have to deal with this, and this will usher in a new era of political recrimination and division. They say here, the only way to move this forward is with impeachment and conviction in the Senate. This one's obvious. The concept of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution is also rooted in the text of the Constitution. For example, the impeachment judgment clause says that the president may be charged by indictment only in cases where he's been convicted by the Senate. Trump was acquitted by the Senate for the same conduct that Fani is charging here, and so he retains immunity based on that. They tell us the impeachment judgment clause provides the judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office, and that the party, quote, convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to removal. Hamilton explained this. We've read a lot of this. James Wilson explained this. We read a lot of that. And the Supreme Court has applied this concept to federal judges, saying judges of these courts can only be reached, they wrote this in 1871 in the U.S. Supreme Court, by public prosecution in the form of impeachment, and then after the impeachment by other forms as the law prescribes. Saying in this case, President Trump is not a party convicted in an impeachment trial by the Senate. In fact, he was acquitted. So therefore, he remains immune from prosecution. Now we go back a ways to a case we talk a lot about here, Marbury versus Madison, saying that courts cannot second guess the presidential duties. In cases involving president duties, whatever opinion may be entertained of the matter, there is no power to control the discretion of the presidency. If the courts could substitute their discretion in for the president, then the court is the president, okay? If the National Archive says Donald Trump can't really control the documents that are constitutionally entitled to him under the opinion clause of the Constitution, then Deborah Stidel Wall from NARA is the president, okay? That's not how this works. So here, that's pretty clear. Now, 234 years of history support this. Unbroken historical practice. From 1789 until 2023, no prosecutor has ever done that until right now. Why is that? Have we had other bad presidents allegedly before? They say Trump's an insurrectionist. No other president has done anything close to that warrants criminal prosecution? You mean like George Bush lying to an entire country, getting thousands of Americans killed is not a criminal operation, not criminal insurrection? What about Obama executing American citizens, blowing them up in drone strikes? What about Joe Biden allowing an invasion, allowing foreign individuals to invade our border and insurrect the country, right? We don't know who's in there. So those are a lot of insurrections. Turn around, charge everybody with those, I guess. But American history teems with people that passionately believe that they were criminals. John Quincy Adams, he had a corrupt bargain deal with Henry Clay. That was a prime example. They thought that was all criminal. They didn't prosecute anybody. In every such case, the outraged opposing party eventually power, yet none ever brought charges against the former president based on the exercise of his official duties. Happens, even Trump did this when he was going against Clinton. Remember, you belong in jail. Never prosecuted her, never crossed that threshold, and she was never even president. But they don't care about that decorum. They're so petrified of Trump, they'll do anything. They'll wreck the justice system, shatter the credibility credibility of the FBI, destroy the sanctity of the court. They don't care because they're so petrified of this guy for whatever reason. Now, nor did any state or local prosecutor do the same. In fact, we have a strong historical practice of not exercising that power. There's been a lot of incentive and opportunity to do so, but they just found it now. They say here, presidential immunity from civil suits. We're very familiar with that from the Nixon case. Legislative immunity also supports this idea. In the Johnson case, absolute immunity to members of Congress who are acting within the scope of their duties. Speech and debate immunity resembles presidential immunity, and so on. Judicial immunity also supports this. Now, there are concerns, they say. What happens if a president is suddenly subject to prosecutions by Tishies and Fannies all across America? Well, that's going to be a problem for the presidency. It's going to hamstring the presidency. They're not going to be able to do anything lest Fannie wake up and decide, well, I'm going to take out my opponent. No one exercises more sensitive duties than the presidency. And this position requires bold and unhesitating action. As the president, you're like, am I going to get charged for everything? Like, this is a close call. I need to do a Jack Bauer situation in 24. Beep, 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 beep. And he goes, pull it! And then building 7 goes down or whatever. You know, you have no idea what's happening. So is he going to be subject to criminal charges for that? The president doesn't want to be subject to charges. So they say that would hinder them. The president maybe wouldn't pull building 7, or something. I don't know. So you can see this is the point of this. The president will be under attack as it's happening now. The presidency would be harassed by vexatious actions as well. Everybody would just indict him everywhere you turn. But part 2, they give this back to us. They say the indictment also alleges only acts that are within the areola. They're all these acts within the Engeron, all within the outer perimeter, saying given the president's absolute immunity from criminal prosecution, the indictment must also be dismissed. Any acts within the outer perimeter are protected. And as the highest of all posts with the broadest of duties, that means the president warrants the broadest possible immunity that exists. And the outer perimeter is very broad. We have Article 2, which gives the president the executive power to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Man, that is a broad statement right there. Take care that the laws be faithfully executed. That includes elections, doesn't it? I'd read it that way. Now, it's the nature of the act, not the manner of the act, that determines whether it falls within the scope of immunity. The nature of the act. You can't just say, well, he acted in bad faith or he acted with malice, because obviously you're going to make that claim for everybody. You're just going to turn around and say that guy did it and that guy did it and that guy. Obviously he's corrupt. So if you were just able to just say, well, he did something criminal because he's corrupt or he acted with bad faith or malice, then every immunity claim would just evaporate like it'd have no teeth to it. And so you can't defeat it by just making that allegation. And for the same reasons here, alleging that Trump's immunity was part of a conspiracy, it doesn't defeat immunity. You don't get to turn around and say it doesn't exist because you make that allegation. Judge Learned Hand often analyze this as well. Within the outer perimeter, it's good. Saying here, presidential conduct. Now, the other argument they say is that this was Trump's personal conduct. Well, he was campaigning for president. He was self-interested. He wanted to get reelected again. I said, well, that may be true, but there's also an official reason for this. And so if you have these two things side by side, some official obligations, requirements, and some official, personal and official, they say here, because of the unique nature of the presidency, you get one with the other. If you're enforcing federal elections, it might mean that as a consequence of having actual free and fair elections, you win because the people voted for you. Darn it. The fact that it happens to be Trump is the victor doesn't mean, oh, well, I guess this is going to be good for me, so I can't do anything like this. Everything the president does should be both two things. One, great for the country, and as a result, great for the president. That's what we want. If it is great for the president and bad for the country, that's not what we want. Like endless wars in multiple jurisdictions around the globe. So the fact that they happen to coincide with one another doesn't negate the fact that Trump had an obligation on January 6th as the president of the country still in office to enforce the rules. They say when these two coexist, Supreme Court has recognized this. They say, yeah, some of it's personal, obviously. For any president, the line between official and personal is elusive and difficult to determine. And the Biden administration also recently elucidated this point. They said in the DC circuit, they said as a first-term president, the president is in a sense always a candidate for office. There you go. That's true, isn't it? And it's not the least bit unusual, this is Biden speaking, for first-term presidents to comment on public policy or foreign affairs at campaign events and policy changes by tweet. Yeah, they're commingled, very connected. And so it's not appropriate here to frame this immunity question to say that just because it was good for Trump means it's automatically technically illegal. No, free and fair elections are good for the country. And so thus, all of the president's speech involved his official acts. Even if you consider the dual character conduct, that's fine. It's still within the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities. Okay, if Trump is going to something purely personal or doing something that is purely personal, like the idea would be like Nixon in Watergate, okay? Having people break in to steal records, that's not part of your official responsibilities as a president, right? So that's outside of the perimeter. That's outside of the areola. So if you're behind that, if you're coordinating that or something like that, that is not, you can't even make the argument that that is in your official duty. It is outside, but free and fair elections are coinciding with both. So every act in this falls inside the outer perimeter. And you know what these are. Making public statements and tweets, obviously, you're allowed to do that. It's free speech. He's the president. Justice Department has talked about this. Supreme Court has emphasized that you're allowed to speak. And so posting tweets on matters of public concern that relate to the administration is within the heartland of his official duties. A tweet is a public statement in a different and more accessible format until Twitter deletes them from you. They say the fact that Trump often communicated through X, through Twitter, is merely a difference of medium, not of function. And that's part of the other reason why they censored him out, is so that we couldn't hear from him. So they censored both sides. Now they say, here, we want to address a different allegation. The district court in Thompson versus Trump recently said that Trump's tweets are not within the outer perimeter of his duties. But they say that's because Thompson was addressing a different set of allegations, which is distinguishable from this case. They say, regardless, their analysis is unpersuasive. Trump's appealing that decision. Trump acknowledges that whatever one thinks of Trump's views on the election, they were plainly matters of public concern. And that analysis should have ended there. In other words, Trump is not obligated to listen to Bill Barr. Bill Barr says, Mr. President, we've investigated. There's no evidence of electoral fraud anywhere. He says, get bent, okay? You're not the president. I'm the president. Now, you might say that that was bad discretion or bad judgment. I don't think so, because those people were institutionalists who were going to preserve the status quo no matter what. And the president has to acknowledge when people are not good judges of reality, right? And so we've got our opinions on the DOJ. Yeah, they didn't investigate it. Got it. So second, they say Thompson misapplied his own furtherance of a presidential function. And so that is happening all in that case. That case is bad, they say. Talking with the DOJ is part of the president's duties. Obviously, it's the heart of his duties. He runs the DOJ. Hello. Urging his own Justice Department to do more to enforce the laws is an official act of the presidency. Instructing his attorney general to direct his personal attentions of legal concerns is literally the job. And so thus his authority over these agencies means it is a presidential function. It's in the Constitution. Now, meeting with the state officials is also part of Trump's duties. They said, yes, he communicated with state officials. Now, these are the sorts of communications that the DOJ, you'd have them investigate if it had actually investigated this. And so if the president can have the DOJ do that, then the president can do it himself because he is superior to the DOJ. So everything the DOJ can do, Trump can do as well, because the power of the DOJ emanates from the presidency and Congress and the Constitution, which dictates the presidential powers. So as noted above, the election crimes branch had an opinion and the current administration came to the same conclusion. Talking to state officials about their official duties is within the scope of the president's duties. So let me ask you this. Can Biden's DOJ talk to any state officials, or is that interfering with elections? Because they're doing that. We've seen that. They communicate all the time to increase efficiency and to share data about disinformation and misinformation. It's all garbage. So if they're even talking to state officials, that certainly must be an insurrection there as well, right? Now, Thompson came to a different conclusion about this, but theirs is wrong. Thompson's conclusion is just bad. They say a lot of there. But here, the president's view of the public good affects the civil rights of millions of federal voters. That's within his obligation. So they say communicating also with Congress, clearly within the presidential duties. The Constitution assigns to the president extensive roles in the legislative process. Mike Pence was the president of the Senate at the time, and the president has power to veto bills. So he interfaces with Congress all the time. Here, the indictment says that Trump urged Vice President Pence to exercise his election certification authorities and to address concerns. That is literally his job. As the current administration points out, a president acts within the scope of office when he urges members of Congress to act a certain way, even when the president has no constitutional role. That's from a Blossingame amicus brief. Okay, so that's from the government themselves saying that. They also say there's direct historical precedent for a sitting president communicating with members of Congress about election fraud. Here's a good case. President Grant, 1876 election. President Grant talked about the electoral count and the claims of fraud with a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Wow. Was there a big Fani back then who prosecuted him? Answer, no. That's a new invention. President Grant transmitted to Congress a letter that he got from an observer, a U.S. senator, whom had requested to go to New Orleans Orleans and witnessed the counting of the vote. And President Grant also dispatched federal troops to Louisiana and to Florida to prevent violence while the votes were counted. And he instructed the federal troops to report fraud in the election. Those were presidential acts. Well, that's an interesting one. I didn't know that. Learning some more history here. So President Grant, this comes from the Papers of Ulysses Grant. Scholars Junction, they wrote that. Visited January 8th, 2024. So that's a nice little section there. We've got here, and apparently he wasn't indicted by an illegitimate special counsel. That's strange. Now, allegedly, they say requesting another person to organize contingent electors, that also falls within the president's official duties for two reasons. It's within the outer perimeters. He's got to control, make sure there is a fair election. Part of the fair election is having alternate slates of electors in case the results are rejected. Got a font change here. That's one size a little too small. Want to bump that up a size. But second, as the indictment itself emphasizes, the actions of organizing slates of electors were ancillary and they were preparatory in case it was contingent, in case it did come back down. Acts that are part and parcel of this, including preparatory actions, are immune from liability as well. And so anything here, right, Trump alleging that Trump's presidential acts were part of a criminal conspiracy with bad malice, actual malice in there, is not enough to defeat immunity. And so for the reasons set forth, in addition, the Supremacy Clause also says that the federal Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Here you see it, the supreme law of the land, the Constitution, the laws of the United States. All treaties are the supreme law of the land. Every state is bound. This has been found. The Supreme Court has held that states cannot use their criminal law to interfere with the functioning of a government. But that's what they're doing here. And there can be no doubt that the election of the president is connected to the function of the national government. Supremacy Clause case supports that as well. And so for the same reasons, the criminalization of this process is unconstitutional. And Stephen Sado from Georgia, representing Donald Trump, says President Trump's prosecution for alleged acts during his term in office is barred by presidential and supremacy clause immunity. And so accordingly, this motion to dismiss this prosecution brought by Fani should be granted, and all counts in this indictment should be dismissed with prejudice. Sent over to Judge Scott McAfee in Georgia as the Georgia prosecution continues. And we'll see what Fani's office says in response to this. We know there is about to be a lot more litigation in this case because we have trial coming up this year, theoretically. We need to get a trial date anchored in, but we're going to see what happens because the election is right around the corner. And so Donald Trump's team says federal supremacy, presidential immunity are what protect him. The federal Constitution and the role of the presidency insulate him against hack partisan prosecutors. But Nancy Pelosi, she doesn't really care about that federal Constitution or really your right to vote at all. When asked about whether Trump should be booted and be removed from the ballots and removed from this process entirely, which is basically their endgame here, she says it's up to the states. Almost forgot that we have a Constitution. Has she even read it, do you think?
If you believe he engaged in insurrection under the plain meaning of the 14th Amendment, you believe he's ineligible to be president.
Those laws, those are up to the states. They have different laws from state to state. I don't think he should ever have been president. But nonetheless, there's a view of the Constitution in Article 14, Section 3, that he should not be able to run for president. But that's not the point. The point.
So she wants states to just say, you're off, you're off, you're off. Based on state constitutions or what? It's a free-for-all out there. These people have no idea what they're talking about.
Right now is, again, different states have different laws. We don't think in California that it applied in our state. That's what the decision was made here. But anyway, not to go into that because that's very intricate.
What is she talking about? What case was that? California said it didn't apply. We got a ruling out of California because last I heard, the lieutenant governor of California was trying to remove him. Is she drunk again?
Clear is that the American people want us to honor our oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Being from Baltimore, I'm proud of the national anthem. And in it says, proof through the night that our flag was still there. We have to prove through this campaign in the night that our flag is still there with liberty and justice for all, and not have an acceptance of Confederate flags under Lincoln's dome with a president sitting in the White House doing nothing to stop the violence. He talks about the big steal as he engages in the big lie.
Okay, hammered, right? Hammered. All right. So, or just not that bright or something. I don't know what she's talking about, to be honest. She just listed a whole thing off, forgot about the entire Constitution. Well, look, that's not the point. It is the point, Nancy. Your oath is to the Constitution. Hello. What are you talking about? So I'm pretty sure she's drunk. I don't even know what to say. Maybe not. Maybe she's not. Maybe there's something else going on there. I think she's drunk. So here, Donald Trump heard about what's happening. So, of course, Colorado is trying to throw Trump off the ballot. And he responded to this when he was in Iowa. Let's see what he said here.
I have some big things going in there. I just saw the Supreme Court just before I came. I got some beauties today. I had the one and then I had the other. Supreme Court is taking the case from Colorado.
That's right.
You appoint some of these radical left Democrats and they've right from the beginning, you say, we're dead. And the Republican judges want to go out of their way to be fair and unbiased and even to a point where they hurt you. And I guess it's a different wiring system or something. But all I want is fair. I fought really hard to get three very, very good people, and they're great people, very smart people. And I just hope that they're going to be fair because, you know, the other side plays the ref.
All right. They do play the ref. They are setting up the people who are refereeing the elections, like Jena Griswold. She's going to make sure the votes are counted appropriately. Isn't that crazy? So the woman who is out there hitting the media airwaves, as we're about to listen to here, not worried about disenfranchising anybody, is going to tell us that she can be a fair and impartial and neutral arbiter of the election in Colorado. Do you believe that for a second? I don't. Here is what she said when she was even asked about this by, I believe, CNN, who is very happy that Trump has been officially removed from the ballot, even though his name is officially on the ballot. This is all pending the Supreme Court, so his name is going to go on. But if the Supreme Court reverts this, if the Supreme Court says, yeah, it is the states that can decide this, then even though Trump's name's on the ballot, even though everybody's going to vote for him, they will still disqualify those votes. So you can go in there, fill in the bubble, and there's a possibility right now, I hope it's low, that your vote will not count. That's what these people have done. That's where we're at right now.
And if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Colorado Supreme Court to remove Trump from the ballot, but his name is still there, what happens then?
Colorado's elections take into account candidates who either drop out of a race when their name is already on the ballot or otherwise unable to be voted on.
Like when you kick them out?
Situation, if voters cast a ballot or a vote for someone who is disqualified, we would not be able to count those votes. I think
so every person who fills in the bubble, your votes will go right into the garbage. You're welcome. Democracy in America. They're saving democracy.
Underlines that how unprecedented this situation is. Usually when we have disqualifications arise, it's not with the president. It's not with candidates running for president, because usually candidates running for president don't engage in insurrection and don't have this crucial constitutional question.
Neither did Trump, crazy eyes. She just made it up, right? They just decided this. We had in Colorado a 5-day trial, which was a joke. Okay. There was no jury. They just admitted a bunch of hearsay evidence. There were no real experts. I mean, there were a couple of like law professors. It was wild, right? Everybody kind of goes, okay, that was like a show sham trial. No due process at all. So they just decided. And in fact, the district court judge decided that the 14th Amendment didn't apply. Then it went up. 4 Democrats out of 7, 3 of them were also Democrats, thought it was nuts, but the other 4 decided this. So, and they were political appointed, Democrats appointed on the Colorado Supreme Court by Democrats. They were Democrats. So they just decided, essentially, 4 people just decided that there was an insurrection based on a show trial that by standard jurisprudence is not legitimate at all. No due process whatsoever.
Facing their candidacy.
Here's what Trump's lawyers are arguing in their filing about whether the 14th Amendment even applies to the former president. They write, to find that Section 3 includes the presidency, one must conclude the drafters decided to bury the most visible and prominent national office in a catch-all term that includes low-ranking military officers while choosing to explicitly reference presidential electors. I mean, to a lot of people, including many legal...
Yeah, basically what she's referencing is in the insurrection clause, it lists in a list separated by commas the different names. Okay, senators, representatives, people who do this, blah, 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 and then other officers of the law, right? So there's like a hierarchy that you can parse through. Senators, representatives, this official, and it goes down in rank. And so they're saying you just tucked Trump up in there? Like if it meant president, it would have said president like the prior drafts did or argued. And then they took that out. So why is that, crazy eyes, Jena?
Experts, this doesn't make sense, just common sense. What do you think? Does it hold any merit?
I agree that it doesn't make sense. It does not make sense to allow a president to engage in insurrection and get off
Answer the question.
Free. A president, the person who has arguably the most power in this country, should not be able to do that type of action and run again when every other elected official would be barred from doing so. Donald Trump is basically arguing to the United States Supreme Court that he did not engage in insurrection, but even if he did, it's okay. He can still be president again. I disagree with that.
That's not what what he's saying. He's not saying, even if I did commit insurrection, that's okay, I can be president again. That's not the argument. The argument is there was no insurrection. You say there was. There is immunity for things that are borderline, and this is clearly not outside of the border. If it were, he already would have been convicted by the Senate when this was on trial the first time. And he wasn't, Jena.
2 Colorado courts have already found that he did engage in insurrection. I think it's very clear from the actions around January 6th before and after his role in that violent insurrection. But regardless of my sentiments, this is a big case in front of the United States Supreme Court. And I do believe that the United States Supreme Court should tell the American people whether a president can engage in insurrection and then again run for that office.
All right, so she's absolutely crazy. You can just see it right there in the eyes. But she's misinterpreting Trump's argument. I've already belabored that enough. Not going to repeat myself ad nauseum here. But they keep saying, essentially, the argument boils down to the president can do whatever he wants and any criminal charge can happen and there's no consequence for the president and he can't be allowed to run again because I don't like it. Look at those eyes, man. Every time I pause the video, it's incredible. All right, so that's Crazy Eyes Jena over in Colorado, and not real worried about disenfranchising people either. So they're just going to boot 1.3 million people who voted for Trump in the last election off and disenfranchise anybody who's probably switching their vote this time around because the country is in a much worse off position than it was back then. But remember Muriel Bowser, mayor of DC, the woman who rejected the National Guard? Trump sent a letter. We've read it here many times. Trump sent a letter to her and said, hey, we're a little concerned that there's going to be a lot of people who are showing up on January 6th, you know, because they told you that they were going to do that, which is also amazing. Like the Capitol Hill Police, Metro Police, FBI, Homeland Security, there were 1 million people, so-called, who were going to be reported to come, and they couldn't secure the building of the most important building in the whole world at that time with most of the US government inside. What do we need any of those agencies for then? Are they just that dumb? Like literally, are they that dumb? All of them? They couldn't figure it out. All right, so one person who had an idea that this might happen was Trump. Hello. He sent a letter to Mayor Muriel Bowser and said, would you like some National Guard here? And she said, no, we can handle it. And back then, this was because they all thought that Trump was going to use the National Guard to like stand up a new government or something because they're that demented. So when he says, can I help? They say no. When something bad happens because they didn't take his help, they say, how dare you? And here she is again on MSNBC.
In the lead up to this day 3 years ago and what he did on that day, January 6th, do you think he should be barred from any ballots given his actions on January 6th?
Well, I support every state taking very aggressive action, keep him off the ballot. He is undergoing, court action across America. Actually, I do know that we've never had a situation where a sitting president could be a convicted felon. And so the uncertainty that people are going to the ballot with is also unprecedented. Is he going to be on the ballot or not? Is he going?
Yeah, and that's by design, by the way. So this is election interference. Okay, when we wake up next year or November this year and we start looking at the results, if they don't go Trump's way, we are absolutely legitimate in saying they stole the election because they're doing it right now. They're trying to keep him off the ballot. They're indicting him and they are trying to cause a national conversation about Trump's legitimacy as a citizen, as a candidate, as somebody who's a felon or not, as somebody who's even on the ballot or not. It is all mucking up the whole election and it's using, the federal government to do it through Jack Smith. It's using the state governments to do it and they're all enabling it. So it's going to be very curious. And by the way, when Trump wins, they're going to say the same thing. They're going to have a meltdown even greater than anything they alleged happened on January 6th, which was a little riot.
Going to be disqualified? Are people going to vote for someone who's not eligible? And so all of those questions need to be answered before the American people go out to vote. But what I think is also very important is that people don't sit it out. I've heard too many people saying they're going to sit it out. People have to go out and vote. I remember how many of us couldn't believe that he won in the first place. And that's because there were too many people who just didn't think their vote mattered.
Well, a lot of that going on. A lot of people whose votes didn't matter because our voices were suppressed, because the election deadlines were all rigged and changed, ballot collection, drop-off boxes, signature requirements, all of it was rigged in 2020. And then when people were upset about that because you rigged and censored it and you had CIA involvement in it, then they caused, through their own security negligence, a riot after the FBI are shooting into the crowd, or the Capitol Police are shooting into people's faces with hundreds of undercover individuals there in some capacity, even agents or informants picking up Proud Boys leaders from jail and carting them around. So the whole thing was a setup. Now, they are using it as a pretext to keep Trump off. There was always going to be that by design. And so they're just showing us who they are. Their true colors are here on full display. Donald Trump filing his motion to dismiss Big Fani's RICO case. We'll, of course, continue to cover this trial and all of the other Trump trials, my friends. So if you're out there joining us, thank you for subscribing and for sharing this channel with a friend or family member, inviting them to come and join us. Also, check out our website, robertgovea.com. We got a new shop there. Grab some Watcher gear. It's a great way to support the show. And join us on Locals at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, which is our member-only community. We do live streams in the morning. We do Saturday streams. And so we talk about a lot of other things. If you're looking for a little bit more variety, and if you want to connect with some amazing people, that's the place to do it. And so we'll be back here talking more. Of course, Fani Willis is going to reply to all this. We'll see what she says, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.